Hello everyone, this is Michael with the Arkham Horrors, walking you through the various themes that were created for the Feast of Hemlock Vale soundtracks. So without further ado, let's get started. So instead of going through each scenario and talking about the music in each scenario, I thought it would be more useful to go through each of the themes. So we're going to dive right in with theme number 1, which we used first in the Silent Heath soundtrack, and we used it in track 1 of the very first soundtrack. For the Silent Heath scenario, the team of investigators investigates the old Pearl Ridge estate where the Pearl family used to live and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. So I wanted to use the theme to start off right off the bat in a way that evoked a mystery, hence the title being Mystery at Pearl Ridge. So this track has a very slow burn to it before you hear the melody come in the form of these Spitfire Solstice pipes. The other very prominent sound in this track is the repetitive motion of the cello being very roughly bowed, especially with the percussion being played over the top, which also has a very gothic feel to it. It isn't used again until the Longest Night scenario for the track Ajax. Because the track is meant to be the theme for the horse that you discover during the scenario, I wanted to have a very gallopy kind of sound come into play at the very beginning of this. So that's why there's this very clip-cloppy kind of thing going on at the very beginning. But once again, you do hear eventually the sounds of that repetitive bowing happening. Theme shows up again in The Thing in the Depths for the track titled The Thing, which again starts right off with that cello bowing. It's very much the most prominent part of the song. For this particular track though, there's a little bit of a vocal thing going on as well. And for the Fate of the Vale, it gets used as the opening track. This time I wanted to stay away from that hard cello sound because it had been used so prominently in the previous 3 soundtracks. So both that thumping bass and then that rough bowing, I wanted to kind of have that take a back seat to some of the other sounds that are in the arrangement, before eventually coming in with the arpeggiated cello playing that kind of goes up and down and up and down. You'll hear vocals appear in this one as well, but I changed them around just a little bit so they sounded slightly different. For the second theme, you first encounter it in the Written in Rock scenario under track 4, Descent into the mines. Written in rock, you find yourself entering the mouth of an old abandoned mine, and eventually you find yourself on a runaway mine cart, barreling through all these tunnels and trying to steer through these tunnels without crashing. So there's very much this sense of movement that this theme is all about. I use it repeatedly when trying to illustrate that the team are venturing into a thing or through a thing. So in this case, it's that they're heading into the mines. You do hear this theme again for Hemlock House. It is the opening theme for Hemlock House. Again, similarly, it's meant to set the stage that we're about to embark on something. So, because the basic idea is that the villagers think that the house is haunted or infested with some sort of evil, I wanted to start this track out with having a sense of foreboding, very much the sense of like, I don't want to go in there, but I know I have to. So it does start slightly different. Instead of starting out with that very percussive sense, I have it just kind of very slowly come into more of that. I just really wanted it to have a much slower build. And then for this one, it really is more about those strings. You know, I really wanted to have a lot of that kind of thing where the violas and the violins and the cellos sound like the strings are really, really old or very like self-made, you know. So I wanted this to have a very organic feel, and I think that the strings do a really good job of that in this particular one. Theme shows up again in The Lost Sister. Again, it's the opening track for The Lost Sister as you're going into the caves. Like the Hemlock House, it does have a slow build for kind of the same reason. There's trepidation as you are heading into the caves in Akwan, looking for one of the residents' little sisters who got lost in them. So I wanted to start with kind of this feeling of sadness that, you know, it's unlikely that you will find her alive if you indeed find her at all. Eventually we do have the percussion build a little bit more. And so we do have just a little bit of chimey kind of stuff happening. But this one it definitely feels like it mixes up the format a little bit more from the previous two. And then in the finale, you'll hear it under track 12 for Miasma. And in this particular case, I wanted it to be more fast, so I made the tempo slightly faster for it. And I used some slightly different instruments to interpret the melody that you hear for the bridge. There's a lot more going on here because I wanted to give the impression that you are no longer in the Vale, that you are somewhere else. You're in this other place, other space, that you're not completely in control of your faculties. So there's a lot of kind of left-right synthesizer stuff happening at the same time. And the percussion is just slightly different as well. It's a little more tinny sounding instead of the bigger thumping sounds that you hear from the percussion in the other versions of the track. On to theme 3, which you'll hear in Silent Heath, Written in Rock, and Hemlock House as well. So that sound that opens the third theme in track 3, A Legacy Lost, is the defining sound of the Vale. You'll hear that sound recur in every single soundtrack, I think. You'll hear it at least once. You might hear it 3 or 4 times in some soundtracks because it really is meant to say, this is the Vale. For this particular one, for theme 3, I wanted a slow burn as we uncover the fact that the Pearl family, that their whole legacy was swallowed into the unknown when they all disappeared. So it really is meant to have this very maudlin feel to it, and also have a certain amount of sparseness to it. Eventually you will hear that percussion sound pop up that is probably the predominant instrument in the theme. In Written in Rock, you'll hear it again in track 3 for the Underground Survey. This version of the third theme makes use of the hurdy-gurdy, bellows, and pan flute to kind of, again, use folk instruments to say that, you know, we're in kind of an area that's kind of lost to time. After the first several seconds of the opening of the track, it just falls into oblivion to kind of give the impression of a group of people kind of vanishing into the darkness of a tunnel. So for this track, I really wanted the music to kind of sound like the instruments were just trailing away into nothingness, as it would be if you were kind of wandering through a mine shaft. Like, I think sound just kind of disappears off into the distance. And that was the impression I was trying to give for that. This shows up again in Hemlock House in track 6, What Happened at 11:13. The title of this track is taken from card text on a location in the game that I thought would have some sort of relevance. It talks about the fact that the grandfather clock in I think it's in the entryway, stopped at 11:13. So I thought while playing the game that might have some sort of importance, some relevance, and as far as I can tell, it did not. But I just like that idea. Again, I had this open up, kind of quietly. I have, instead of a pan flute, I have a more standard flute sound used as we go into the bulk of the track. And again, you hear that the voice of the Vale sound come in at the end of the melody. Because this takes place in a house, I wanted the feel to be a little more traditionally orchestral. So I do use a little bit more of a bigger arrangement with brass and strings. But again, I tried to use combinations of instruments that I hadn't previously used before. The last instance of the third theme shows up in the finale under track 10, Recovering an Old Memory. For this, I decided to start it off with some very low vocal chanting and then go into the main percussion. since it hadn't been used very much in the other themes. I wanted to bring it in a little more prominently in this one. So this one starts kind of quiet, apart from the percussion, with some low brass and woodwinds. And then again, I want the brass to get more and more prominent as the chord progression recurs. The build-up should be a little more epic, because this track is all about getting yourself back, getting your identity back, remembering who you were, and being able to, reclaim your sense of self. The 13th track in Twisted Hollow introduces us to the 4th theme. So this track is meant to have very much a kind of Celtic or Nordic feel to it, so you'll hear that in the drums and the pipes and in the plucked instrument that's being played for the melody. The theme shows up again in track 12 of Written in Rock for Dangerous Ride. For this I tried to vary it up slightly. The introduction still starts with kind of the ringing of the bells. I felt like a lot of metallic kind of resonating sounds worked really well for this particular scenario because of the fact that it takes place underneath an abandoned mine where there was probably all this equipment, and because it's meant to convey the sense of the cart kind of going out of control slightly. I wanted there to be a lot of movement in the rhythm, so that's why you keep hearing these different kind of layers of percussion kind of coming in and out of each other throughout this one, is to give that sense. That melody comes in again, but in this form it's more synthesized, and I put a little bit of an echo on it to give it again just a bit more pace so that it feels a little faster. In Hemlock House, you'll hear the same theme again in track 13, Miasmatic Shadow. Hemlock House for me was all about it being kind of more like a ghost story, so I wanted to use a lot of out-of-tune instruments. So in this case, I'm using a sample of an old lighthouse foghorn combined with some just weird kind of plucky sounds. And then I have it descend into a choir doing the melody. And I think that works really well in terms of just doing this both creepiness and sadness at the same time. And then finally in Fate of the Vale, you'll hear this one last time in track 16, The Fate of the Village. This takes place in the scenario when you finally make your way back to the Vale after being lost in the Mirror Nest. Because this is kind of, you emerge from all of that and you find that the village is kind of, the villagers have gone mad and everything is just kind of completely fallen apart in the village. So I wanted there to be a very serious kind of tone to it and a very urgent kind of tone. So that's why I decided to go with the synthesized bass for this. There is, throughout this track, there's an undercurrent of urgency. So that was kind of the idea with this, is I wanted to bring in elements of this theme that you heard in the other versions, but have it also be very much its own thing as well. For the fifth theme, we find ourselves again at Silent Heath, surveying the estate. The percussion very much takes a prominent role in a lot of these themes because I did want there to be, again, I wanted to make use of these organic drum sounds, these folk kind of drum sounds. For this one, I also used a little bit of a loop of finger snaps and hand claps and things like that, again, just to give it a more human kind of feel to it. Of the various ways that the fifth theme ends up getting used throughout the soundtracks, this one is probably the most subtle. It crops up again in Written in Rock. You hear it as track 10 for the Underground Maze, where it starts right off with a echoey drum sound, again with some very metallic kind of sounding drums in it, before you hear the little arpeggiated sound that's meant to be kind of a PS to the melody. Again, I just wanted the percussion to be really, really metally, and I wanted to give the impression with this track that you're in the presence of a lot of just broken down, rusted out equipment and technology and things like that. In the Thing in the Depths, this same theme gets used in Botanical Survey, track 3. Because the Thing in the Depths takes place in a swamp that's slowly being flooded, I wanted to have this kind of wave kind of feel, this kind of washed over thing. So that's why you hear this kind of tide sound kind of coming in and out. And again, these detuned pipes and things like that, it's just really nice to kind of reinterpret the theme again in a new way before we finally bring in that percussion again. That very distinct sounding percussion sound, that very bouncy kind of percussion. Here it's not tinny, and here it's not echoey, it's more thumpy. Again, it's because we're in a different environment. I wanted it to sound different. I wanted it to sound kind of, to lack kind of that echoey sound in the percussion, because I wanted to give the impression that, like, as you're stepping on kind of wet, muddy ground, so that, sound wouldn't echo with thud. And at the end of the track, you'll hear that finger snap, hand clap kind of rhythm again coming back into play. Last instance of the fifth theme shows up in the second track of Fate of the Vale. The village feels off. Here again, I just want to give the impression that you're starting to notice this takes place in this scenario during the third evening, the beginning of the third evening, as you're going around and visiting people in the village, you start to see that everyone is behaving a little weirdly. And so I wanted to just, right off the bat, even though I'm using the same rhythm and percussion, I'm adding extra things to it just to give it the impression that something feels slightly distorted here. And for like the breakdown in the back half of this, I wanted to add a little extra stuff, just again to give it a little more of a creepy kind of feel to it. There's some detuned horns at the end of it to give it some, again, just a little sense of just feeling slightly, that you're tracking, you're clocking, that something feels slightly weird. So for theme 6, we start off back at Silent Heath. This track shows up in the back half of the scenario as you are in the Warrens, trying to find clues as to what happened to the Pearl family. You see that something just kind of decimated the landscape, also kind of decimated the ground underneath as well. And so this has you kind of going in and out of these tunnels, and you just notice that everything just feels kind of wrecked. So I wanted it to be very minimum, so that we have this chord progression, but it's very sparse sounding. Once again, you hear that sound that is like the sound of the Vale. It's kind of tell you that like whatever happened here seems to be happening no matter where you go in the Vale. There's this feeling that something otherworldly has touched it. And then that finally brings you into like a much bigger string arrangement. But this is very much meant to be like a theme of reflection. Even though there is percussion in it, it really is meant to be more of a taking a breath, taking a deep breath. For the Longest Night on track 2, Preparing for the Onslaught, you'll get that same sense, like you're taking a deep breath before you're getting ready for the stuff that's going to happen later. So in this particular case, it's very washy sounding. It's the calm before the storm. So it's meant to give the impression that, you're just, you're mentally getting ready. As in the previous track, it is a slow burn on this one before the strings really kick in. But when they do kick in, they do definitely play in a very dramatic space. And eventually at the end of this track you do hear a little bit of hurdy-gurdy coming in as well, again just to remind you that you're in a village that's kind of out of time. For the Thing in the Depths, you'll hear this theme on track 12, Discovery of a Lifetime. Instead of the strings being the dominant voice in it, the percussion and this detuned guitar with a lot of kind of echo inflection on it is way more dominant. The strings take more of a backseat to that. Theme 6 gets used very differently in the finale, Fate of the Vale. This one starts off with some warbling vocals, and then slowly kind of builds into some percussive, echoey elements before going into the breakdown synthesized melody. You'll hear, instead of strings being the dominant force for the chord progression, you're going to hear it being a combination of hurdy-gurdy, bellows, and some vocals. There is a little bit of strings in there, but it is primarily those other instruments. This also has a little kind of counterpoint that goes over the top of the chord progression, as well as things build up. But for this, I felt vocals were very important to kind of convey the fact that Mother Rachel has turned into something else. Speaking of vocals, you'll hear them a lot in Theme 7. You'll notice in Twisted Hollows Track 2, Find Birdie, that uses a low female vocal to kind of lilt in and out of the track, which again is very percussive. Because this scenario is all about finding a missing member of your team, I thought it was important to use a track like this to convey a sense of urgently moving through an unknown area to try and find him. So you're hearing these vocal undulations, and you're hearing a cello being, again, roughly bowed with this just singular note. It's nighttime, you're in an unknown area. The only thing lighting your way may or may not be a lantern. That was the idea there. In The Longest Night, the theme shows up again. For this theme, it's meant to be very representative of like task-oriented point in the story. So in Find Birdie, it's that you're about to head out into the forest at night to find your team member. In The Longest Night, you'll hear it because you are urgently trying to set up ways to stop a horde of unknown enemies from converging on a farmhouse. Again, you're going to hear these vocal undulations kind of going through in and out of this track as well. I wanted to use, again, more of that folk-sounding percussion. This time I accompanied it with some tambourine, because again, that feels very of a Nordic or Celtic festivals. It would feel like they would have a tambourine kind of in the mix. The percussion in this is meant to be very bouncy, again, because it's meant to give the impression that you are urgently trying to accomplish a task. You'll hear this as well in The Lost Sister, as you are attempting to deal with this very strange creature that's keeping you from getting out of the caverns. So this one has a bit of a slow burn before you get into the percussion, but again, that's supposed to be the whole point of this track, is that you're faced with this very strange, part lobster, part alien creature that you're trying to find a way to deal with it so that you can make your way back out to the Aquan village. So again, you'll hear very rough cello sounds. You're going to hear bouncy percussion. You're going to hear that vocal undulation a little bit in it. Because of where this track is positioned in the scenario, I decided not to go too aggressive with it. I wanted it to be a little more restrained because we're approaching the finale of the scenario, so it's meant to be kind of mid-tempo more than up-tempo kind of thing. So it's a little more restrained as far as like other things kind of happening in it beyond the percussion. It in the finale for track 15, Through the Caverns, a little bit differently. Like in the previous instances of this, again, it's all about movement. It's all about getting through a thing. It's all about accomplishing a task. And so again, the percussion is very, very important in this one. And again, because we are underground, I wanted to have a bit of an echoey feel to it and a bit of a metallic feel to it, kind of like in the mines as well. I wanted to have this feel that things are kind of ringing off the walls. There are these vocal undulations as well, and the cello is playing a very, very prominent role in this one as well. Theme 8 will take us off the rails in the Written in Rock scenario. This is a much more up-tempo track. Again, it is more of a showdown kind of theme or an action kind of theme. So it is just a simple but very repetitive 4-note progression. For this particular one, even though it starts off with a lot of bouncing bass and percussion, it does have this really nice acoustic guitar kind of break in the middle of it. Eventually, it builds to this weird breakdown, which again, you'll hear some vocals kind of warbling. Again, it's meant to give the impression that you're in a minecart that is just bouncing you all over the place, and you don't know if you're going to make it out alive. You don't know where you're going. You're doing your best to steer it, but you are not in control of the situation. In Hemlock House, this manifests itself in track 11, Pulled In, where again I wanted to give that same kind of sense of, you know, you are in unknown territory. You are trying to get out of this house now, and the house is trying to keep you in it as it's kind of folding in on itself. So this time I have it starting with that breakdown. So you'll hear some acoustic guitar, and you'll hear the warbling vocals, and then eventually it'll settle into the percussion. There's a nice little breakdown in this one as well, with this nice little plucky kind of sound. In the Lost Sister, you'll hear this in the finale of the soundtrack, Engaging the Lobstrosity. So this opens up with this just strange sound that then, you know, dumps you right into the bass line, which again is just meant to be that, like, you know, you're facing down this really wild looking creature, and you're either going to try and get away from it, or you're going to try and defeat it. So I wanted to give it, you know, this kind of low burn kind of thing, and then move into something a little more chaotic. So the breakdown has a little additional stuff kind of going on in it in this time to make it a little more dissonant sounding and give it a little more cacophony. This also ends up being the finale for Fate of the Vale as well. This is the very last track that you hear and the very last soundtrack of the campaign. Again, you will hear the sound of the Vale at the beginning of the track as it goes into just some, very deep, dark, heavy percussion. I wanted this one to sound as different as possible from the other versions of the theme, because I wanted it to be a little more kind of epic. So you're going to hear some vocal undulations throughout this track, but you're also going to hear a lot of kind of distorted orchestral sounds as well. Big brass sounds, very bouncy brass and pizzicatos and things like that. But there's also these breakdowns that keep happening in it as well. I wanted to give kind of these moments of pause to kind of give the idea of like, are we going to get out? Are we not going to get out? So this one was really meant to be like the big cinematic closer. I add a lot of extra melodies into this from the original idea of the theme. This one took quite a lot longer to do because of that. For Theme 9, we're back in the Twisted Hollow. This theme actually ended up getting used twice, this scenario. I used it for track 1 and track 12. I think that was inadvertent when I initially did that, but I think it worked really well because I was recalling a thing. So this opens up the Twisted Hollow scenario, again with these really weird vocal distortions, twisted, warped kind of vocal things. And then you've got these sweeping violin and violas. I wanted them to be a little sharper sounding so they didn't sound quite so orchestral, so that's why they've still got a hint of that kind of homemade feeling instrument. And there's also just a little hint of some clarinet in there as well. Eventually it settles into this arpeggio with the violins, this very high, flowy kind of sound as it goes kind of up and down. This one is just all about tone setting for the scenario. Back at Hemlock House, you'll see this in track 15, Willfire Cleanse This Place, where the idea is that you were running out of options for trying to find a way out of this house and a way of dealing with the presence that's in the house. So I wanted to, again, just use this theme as an opportunity to give the idea of someone attempting to set fire to the house to see if it will in fact burn the house down, and just the sadness of like having to resort to doing that, to having to use fire to purify this place. This is very much a reflective theme. Where a lot of them are more about urgency and moving and all that. This is definitely more about tragedy. And this track definitely is one that kind of conveys the tragedy of having to burn down a house to accomplish what you're trying to do. In The Lost Sister, track 5, Winding Through the Caverns, you'll hear the theme used a little bit differently though. It starts off with this chimey kind of thing, and then I do put a little bit of percussion on it, a little bouncy percussion. Instead of using high strings to convey the chord progression, I wanted to use low woodwinds instead. The emotion that I was trying to project in the first half of this soundtrack is one of giving the idea that the search for the sister is probably not one that's very hopeful. Eventually you do hear the strings come in and kind of counter the sounds of the woodwinds. And then running throughout that is this bouncy percussion sound. In the finale, this theme manifests itself in track 13, Sublimation. I wanted to use something a little bit different because, again, this is supposed to take place in the realm of the Mirror Nest, and so I wanted again to make this feel otherworldly. So instead of using identifiable instruments in the very beginning, I wanted to make things sound a little more vague. So you do have these plucky sounds. Eventually you'll hear a clarinet come in. This is one of the times where I used an instrument that was outside of the orchestra. I wanted to go with a solo clarinet to play this. So I chose a little something that wasn't in the original orchestra. Again, sometimes you gotta find the right tool for the job. So as the track builds, you'll start to hear these deeper horns, these low horns kind of playing down. And then these really high brassy sounds coming in waves in and out as the strings play the arpeggiation, and that's all coupled with some timpani. This is one of these situations where I'm in the last soundtrack of the collection. It's all about finale, and so I wanted this one to be a little more epic, a little more sounding more like an orchestral score. So it definitely has more of that element in it. For theme number 10, we go back to the Twisted Hollow for track 7, We've Been Here Before. Again, in Twisted Hollow, it's all about wandering through the forest at night. And you may or may not have lantern lighting your way. You find yourself going in circles sometimes, and so I wanted to, again, convey this feeling of not knowing where you are. So for this, I used a lot of hurdy-gurdy and bellows at the beginning to give me that out-of-tune tension sound. Eventually, you'll hear the melody kick in, and for this, I used just some tuned percussion to kind of lilt in and out. I say tuned percussion, but it's really kind of out-of-tune percussion to kind of lilt in and out. In The Longest Night, the same theme gets used very differently for track 12, Fighting Back the Horde. Even though you hear that same hurdy-gurdy sound and drony kind of sound, there's a lot of percussion that's kind of coming in and out, and again, it's just meant to give it kind of an action-y kind of feel to it. There's a nice bouncy bass that comes in. Again, it's just meant to be more of an action scene. For the final track in The Thing in the Depths, you'll hear this used again in an action sense. It has a bit of a slow build to it. You'll hear that tuned percussion coming in, but there's a lot of percussive stuff that's going on before it finally settles into the big showdown in the back half of the song. This is all about getting that strange hybrid creature to safety. So you're trying to beat off these tendrils and try and keep it away from this creature while you corral it to safety. Fate of the Vale uses this in track 7, The Spiral. I take a little bit of a different approach with this one. Instead of it being super actiony, I let this have a really slow burn. I just use that melody kind of over and over again in a very kind of distant sound. It's slowed down a little bit. It's meant to be a little more dramatic sounding for this. It does eventually build with a lot of woodwind sounding instruments and string sounding instruments, but it's all drowned in this kind of really deep reverb and echo, because again, it's just meant to give the impression that you are somewhere very foreign to you and that you don't know where you are. Eventually it does pick up towards the end and you'll hear some percussion, you'll hear some string rhythm. But again, this one is meant to sound a little bit different, so it does take its time getting to that point. For theme 11, we're back in Twisted Hollow. This track is another one that's a big one that is meant to give the impression of movement. There's just a lot of traveling. The majority of the scenario is spent just wandering through a forest. So in this one, we've got more of those vocal undulations. We do have this drony sound, which again is meant to give a kind of a Nordic, Celtic kind of feel to it. There is this detuned horn pipe melody in there. There's a lot of detuned and out of tune instruments in this. A lot of vocals that are kind of not quite in tune with each other, and brass instruments and pipes and things like that. Hemlock House, track 3, Inspecting the Manor, it's a little more subtly used. You still have that bouncy percussion, but you have the instruments taking much more of a light-handed approach. There's some humming going on from some female vocalists. There's a little bit of cello going in and out. You've got these bells chiming. Again, because this is a scenario that's set indoors, for some reason it just feels like the sound should be a little more contained in it. The instruments should sound a little closer in your ears. So you do hear things maybe a little more in the treble range and a little less in the bass range with this. But everything is dialed down slightly from the way that it sounds in the Twisted Hollow. In the Lost Sister, it opens up with, again, this droney, out-of-tune sound. I reused an alternate patch of the foghorn sound and mirrored it with some bellows to give this just strange, weird, untuned sound. There's some affected piano as well in here, some little bouncy piano sounds. This takes place in this scenario where you stumble upon a phosphorescent slime trail in the caves, and it seems to be kind of lighting your way for you. So I wanted to have a lot of openness in this track, whereas in Hemlock House, for Inspecting the Manor, things are a lot closer. For this, I wanted things to ring out a lot, and I wanted there to be more lower, deeper kind of sounds in it. You also hear a little bit of sea shanty kind of sound in some bellows and like some plucked instruments, like a dulcimer kind of sound. For scavenging the village in Fate of the Vale, this gets used a little bit differently. Again, it's another kind of task-oriented song, so it's all about kind of getting around the village and grabbing what you can to either destroy the village or to get out of the village. Again, things are more wide and more open in this because it's meant to be outside. It's meant to be, there should be a lot happening kind of everywhere you look. You're kind of witnessing madness. There's a lot of vocals in here. There's a lot of bellows kind of sounds in here, drones. This one gets very open before it starts getting rhythmic. For quite a while, it's much more spacious sounding before the percussion starts to kick in. Once it kicks in, it definitely brings things up a notch. You'll hear that kind of sea shanty sound again. This time, you hear a little bit of violin as well, accompanying the bellows and the little plucking sound. For a lot of these tracks in Fate of the Vale, I wanted to have a lot of kind of up-down moments in it because I wanted there to be a lot of like space in it for kind of reflecting on what's going on around you. And in this particular track, that's definitely meant to be the case because you're both hurrying to do a thing, but you're also witnessing that these people are not behaving like themselves. The vocals in this are really meant to help kind of convey that, you know, that kind of sadness or despair or hopelessness. For the final theme, we go back to A Silent Heath. This is where we, in the scenario, discover the truth about what happened to the Pearl family. We kind of take a moment of reflection before we start to work our way back to the surface. This is definitely another theme that is meant to be reflective more than meant to be action-oriented. It has a very slow burn to it. It has a lot of kind of dreamy electric guitar kind of plucky things going on in it. Again, it has that very rough bowing of cellos and violas. In The Longest Night, you'll hear this theme show up again in track 4, placing the decoys. Here it is used more in the task-oriented sense. There's a bit more of a percussive element to it, a bit more bounce, a bit more movement in it. Though you do still hear that dreamy guitar kind of sound. There's a percussion loop that recurs throughout it, which again just gives you the sense that you're moving through the area around the farmhouse, and you're trying to set up decoys so that the approaching horde of creatures has something to slow them down. This has a lot of quietness in it, despite all the percussion that's in it. It is still meant to have a very kind of dreamy feel to it. The music kind of echoes out into the night, which is really what I was going for with this one. It's fairly upbeat, considering. In The Thing in the Depths, you'll hear this track a little bit differently. You'll hear it with the cello being very prominent in the very beginning. Again, using that kind of long bowing, just kind of repeatedly bowing of one note. You'll hear the voice of the Vale reoccur in this one as well, but this is a complete kind of different interpretation of the track. Again, going for more of a sparse feel. I wanted this track to be a little less busy for the majority of it, so that the subsequent tracks, which are the finale, don't start to feel too samey with all the bouncy percussion. So this is used a little less in this one. Percussion is much more subtle and doesn't come in really until the last couple of minutes of the track. In the Fate of the Vale, this theme will show up in track 8 for Fragmentation. This is one of the longest tracks on the album, and I think that's because I had so much to work with when I created this theme. I had so many kind of alternate versions of the basic progression of it. This one leans heavily on using the hurdy-gurdy again. The cello plays a fairly strong role in kind of the undercurrent of it. There's a lot of reversed percussion in this, again, to give that idea that things just don't feel quite right where you are. This is at a point in the scenario where you don't know who you are, you don't know where you are. You're just kind of trying to figure that out. And this is the track that kind of encompasses that. This is the track that is you trying to piece together the fragments of what's happened to you. So there's a lot of up and down with this. The percussion comes in and out. There's also this really good plucky thing that happens as well in this. Yeah, I thought this one came out really, really well. I just didn't want to stop working on it, so I kind of kept throwing in, a little of this, a little of that, because I really liked the vibe of the chords and the rhythm and everything. So this one, I wanted it to be a little bit bigger than all the rest, since it was the last chance that anyone was going to have to hear the theme. So it's a little busier, but it also still, I think, kind of works in the context of the scenario. So that is the overview of the way that the 12 themes were composed and reused time and time again throughout the 8 scenarios in the Feast of Hemlock Vale. The process of writing the music for this was definitely very different. It allowed me to make use of a lot of sounds and instruments that I don't normally use when I'm composing music for the game. Because of the settings that a lot of these have been in, it just hasn't been appropriate to use a lot of this stuff. Having said that, I don't know that I will be using a lot of these again now in future. I'm going to have to, when I approach the next campaign, I'll have to be a little more selective with the instruments that I use, so I make sure that I'm not reusing any of the 700 tracks that I used to make this. In all honesty, there were several libraries that got almost no use at all from that 700. And certainly there were a lot that didn't get nearly as much use as I expected, but then I found I needed a lot more than I thought I did. So the whole exercise for me was actually really enjoyable. And I hope it was enjoyable for you. I hope that the music was, I hope that the experience was enjoyable for you. I hope that the music enhanced your gameplay, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. And if you're interested, please like, subscribe, follow me on Facebook at the Arkham Horrors to be the first in line to hear of new releases and behind the scenes videos. Let me know if this is the kind of thing you're interested in, and maybe I'll put some more out in the future. Thanks again.